All right, and I just got the green light from my producer, so we're going to kick it off. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for taking the time out of your day to join us on this live webinar featuring the team from Coursera. We're talking today about the education ecosystem. What I think is really unique about some of the voices we have on the presentation today is how Coursera approaches the mission around learning from multiple different perspectives. The needs of teachers, the needs of students, the needs of the institutions, and many others, as you'll hear about today. I'm your host, Kevin Yanishevsky. Dang glad to be here talking to you today. I'm one of the product marketing managers here at Pendo, and we're here today to talk about education. Obviously, has been a huge topic. We saw in the spring, as schools started to close, as people started to shelter from home, learn from home, huge spikes in usage in e-learning and Edtech categories, and then returning to what we might see as a normal trend as students went to break over the summer. We're entering the first couple weeks of school and we're starting to see those big spikes again. But even over the summer, EdTech has been a key component of the headlines I've been reading and I'm sure you've been looking at as well. So fortunate to have the awesome team from Coursera here. Let's rock through some introductions, guys. Who do we have joining us today?
Hi, I'm Terry Cherwinski. I am a principal product manager here at Coursera, and my focus is on our enterprise product, Coursera for Campus, delivering content to universities and their students and faculty.
My name is Helen Zoe. I am also on the product team. Initially started on our assessments platform, so really thinking about our educators and our learners. And then now I'm managing our skills graph team, so thinking about how do we help learners really understand what skills they're developing on our platform and be able to see progress towards career outcomes.
Hello everyone, I'm Jenny Wallachow. I am a product manager on our platform team, and my team builds the tools that the educators use to create and manage their courses on Coursera. We have a lot of different tools available for them and are excited to support them during this time.
Awesome. Thanks so much for being here. And today's session is going to be a live Q&A, fireside chat, if you will, virtual fireside chat. No slides, not a bunch of words for us to read through, but just an open conversation about what's going on and what we're seeing in the space. And no better place to start than with current events. So clearly we're in some of the first weeks of the semester for some of our universities. Some of our primary schools are thinking about opening up, and already we're seeing that schools are having to adapt in real time. We've seen headlines from Notre Dame, from UNC, from many others across the country. What are you guys seeing on the front lines? What have you heard from your customers, your users, and your teams?
Yeah, so maybe first to speak for universities. Many universities are not going to be on campus. They know that already. Others have a goal of opening on campus, but they worry quite a bit that they'll have to close somewhere midway through the semester. Other universities are kind of in a hybrid mode where they are going to be partially open for like the science majors getting into the labs and that kind of thing, but they're really trying to avoid big lecture hall meetings. And so a lot of the impact for us is that we are trying to really help them adapt to this online world that they're going to be in. We provide great online lectures that they can use from the start and incorporate into their learning methodologies, right? We talk a lot about a flipped classroom model where instruction happens first online, and then there are Zoom calls or on-campus meetings where they can explore and discuss and work on projects together and build deeper mastery. So a lot of the work we're doing in response to the COVID-19 situation is empowering those educators to be able to take advantage of Coursera content to keep their online courses going during this crisis.
And I'm happy to add to that. I have a couple of stats to share about, in the spring when COVID first started hitting and schools were shut, it was really like emergency remote teaching situation where some students and teachers said just like, don't even come back from spring break, and no one had planned for it. And since that time, there are some teachers and some universities that have been able to plan ahead and spend some of this time during the summer deciding how they want to format their teaching in the fall. And then, like Kevin mentioned, I think there are some that had planned to come on campus and then all of a sudden are now back to emergency remote teaching, where they didn't necessarily have the plan in place for how it was going to work.
I really like how you characterize that. And Helen, love your thoughts.
Yeah, I guess from a product standpoint, some of the things that we've been developing to help facilitate that moving of offline teaching onto online teaching. One of the fastest things that we did was actually back in April, we launched a new feature called Course Match. The idea being, can we help universities find content that is similar to what they teach on campus that's already existing on Coursera itself, so that perhaps maybe the professor doesn't have time to put their entire course online already, especially if they're coming from, for example, off of spring break. But instead we could use some type of text embedding to see, hey, this course looks very similar, has a very similar syllabus or similar learning objectives to something that we already have online. So we were able to ingest over 1,800 different catalogs across different universities and be able to match that to courses that we already had on Coursera to say, like, if you guys don't want to move the entire course online, maybe use this lecture that we already have, and then focus the professor's time more on facilitating the discussion or more the flipped classroom model like Terry was mentioning.
Yeah, and in addition to Course Match, back in the March-April timeframe, when universities around the world were just starting to shut down, we as a company came together and said, hey, this is really scary for all of the students around the world, and there's something we feel we can do about that. So we rolled out an initiative where we made our content available for free to students around the world who belong to accredited universities. And thousands of universities signed up for this over the last few months, and we've had millions and millions of learning hours happening from students who were displaced out of their universities, during the springtime and through the summer.
Yeah, I really love, again, the characterization of this, emergency remote teaching, some of the ways you guys have responded to this. I think in the spring, definitely, caught everyone by surprise. There was this summer planning period, and now as schools are reopening with this, flipped classroom model or hybrid learning models, how's the shift impacting your core users?
Yeah, so for universities, they are wanting to, like, back in the spring, it was just acting. All of the universities were acting in crisis mode, right? They were just trying to survive, but now they're actually trying to figure out how to use online to deliver meaningful learning and to really engage with students. And so they are more carefully thinking about how they can blend their own value add, their own instruction with supplemental online content. And I know that on the other side, there are many students who are concerned about going back to a campus situation, and they are looking to Coursera to perhaps take their degrees online. So we really kind of are solving for both situations, solving for helping faculty teach courses to their enrolled students, and also serving up online degrees for students who prefer that.
On the side of the product where I work mostly, which is the people who are creating content on Coursera, our core users are traditionally maybe the most innovative or familiar with technology type of professors who are excited to move things online and are at the forefront. And a big shout out to all of the instructional designers and administrative support staff that are helping to support all of these faculty to make sure that they're designing high quality courses. So those are the core users for us. And I think in this time, not a lot of faculty have a choice in this matter anymore. So there are faculty that in the past had said, no, I don't want to teach online, and had not been trying to do this. And now they are having to learn, and there's even more importance of the instructional design and the support staff role to make sure that everyone is learning how to use these tools and getting comfortable with them. So that's something that we're trying to do, is focus on how do we make the authoring tools on Coursera as easy to use as possible. So, you know, it's always been important, but probably even more important now with a huge influx of new authors coming to the platform.
Yeah, that's right. Previously, we had maybe hundreds, low thousands of authors using our authoring tools across our hundreds of partners. And now we have potentially tens of thousands of educators who across the world who are wanting to incorporate their own private content into our system for their learners. And so Jenny's absolutely right. Learning for us how to scale our authoring tools and support to learners who don't have as much hands-on instruction from us on creating courses that are pedagogically sound and high value to learners. It's been a challenge.
I think also if we think more broadly about the pandemic's impact, even beyond just campuses or university students, there's obviously many adult learners that are out there as well and are looking for ways of basically upskilling or perhaps reskilling into new jobs, given how high unemployment is these days. And so we've seen a couple new influxes of demand, one from governments in terms of wanting to support their countries. I think we've seen about 900 or so inquiries from governments asking about how can they provide Coursera to more of their citizens as a way to retrain the workforce to be ready for new jobs. We've also seen from the learner side a much more heavy interest in terms of career motivated type learning of give me a career learning path to help me guide from where I am today to become ready for an intro to IT job or ready for a intro to data science job. And so a lot of, on the learner side, what we've been thinking about is how do we package our content in a way that really demonstrates you can get career outcomes at the end of this and prepares you for the workforce so that folks can use this time as a way to learn new skills and hopefully be positioned well for finding a new job.
You know, I really like that, and we hear this concept of guided paths a lot when we think about how education is being delivered, and especially in a virtual context. Students need that kind of stepwise engagement. I do want to remind our studio audience that we are taking your live questions, and I'd like to ask one from Jessica right now. Jessica asks, how has the job of the teacher changed during the time of COVID? Jenny as our resident learner expert, or Terry as our resident representative of institutions. What do you guys think? What's going on?
Want to take a first stab, Jenny?
Yeah, sure. As a former teacher myself, I just want to say the job of the teacher is, ultimately the same no matter what, which is help your students learn whatever it is and support them as best you can, being their mentor and a great example for them. I think that in addition to all of that, there's a question of how do you actually do it? And that is what has really changed. The modality of learning is online now. So in addition to being the content expert and the pedagogical expert of how do I communicate this information in the most effective way and give my students an opportunity to apply that learning and practice it, they're probably also being tech support and the online instructional designers in ways that they haven't had to before. So for a lot of teachers out there, there are new skills that they are learning alongside their own students. I think there is also an element of just being there to support people during really tough times, and being as flexible as possible is difficult for people all around the world, especially at different age ranges. But But for adults, there are often people who have families at home while they're learning. And so, there's a lot for people to balance right now. And I think that the job of the teacher is always seeing your students as whole beings, but especially now that's having more of a burden on people.
Yeah, I think there's, in addition to that, there's an uneasiness, at least in the higher academic fields, where faculty are worried that they are going to become obsolete in this world where a lot of online learning is happening. They think about their lecture halls and presenting the information to the students, and they see that as the core value that they're delivering. But students give us feedback that they love being able to, at any time, whatever time works for them, go listen to instruction online. And then when they show up in the classroom with their professor, that they're having a more meaningful, deeper conversation. And that's where teachers and faculty can really rise up and shine in the new world, is to go deeper and build deeper mastery. And really solidify those skills that the learners are eager to build.
Just to build upon that, I think it's always been the case that teachers are creators of content, but also curators of content. It's very typical to look around for the best textbook that you're going to use in your class. And in a similar way, you should not be reinventing the wheel with online materials either. So like Helen was mentioning, where we can find Course Match, which would help you find the existing online course materials to incorporate, and hopefully, take that burden off of you for the content creation piece, because maybe that isn't necessary at this point. Although if you do have some really creative new content, you're at the front of your research field, like that's still really valuable. But as Terry was mentioning, it's the designing your course. How do I put all of this together? How do I connect those threads for my students and make it meaningful to them in these discussions, and helping them get a chance to apply it and practice it together in a safe space? I think teachers are definitely not obsolete in an online world.
It's so interesting to think about how we have this, this cohort of teachers who were initially resistant to implementing technology and now are reluctantly adopting technology. And you guys have talked a lot about how, trying to reduce friction for the process, things like Course Match. What are some of the other ways that you're making this shift, this pivot easier for the people that you serve?
I think one area where we've spent some focus is around well-being during during both the COVID-19 crisis as well as the Black Lives Matter initiative. And so not only are we giving people tools to do their jobs more effectively, but we're sharing out the courses that we have that are related to science, medicine, well-being. We have a course called The Science of Wellbeing that it has seen growth astronomically in terms of enrollments during the shutdown when everybody's working from home. And we're getting a lot of feedback that we're helping people just kind of adapt and adjust to more isolation, the fear of the situation. So, that's another area where we're trying to help. Yeah.
I think that's a great point. Yeah, there's some new courses that have launched recently that I think are very timely. So Johns Hopkins University has put out a COVID-19 contact tracing course, which can help train people for a bunch of new job openings in the contact tracing field, and also some courses on epidemiology and just learning about the virus itself. And then, there's lots of mental health resources. On the enterprise side, we've been putting together collections of these courses to help with employee resilience, and just trying to make all of that available to people who are in the workforce and to people that are students as well.
I would also add that a lot of our energy, and Helen talked about this already a bit, a lot of our energy is around helping learners build new skills and think about new career paths that they may be interested in. And so if your particular job that you've been doing is heavily impacted by the shutdowns, there are opportunities within Coursera to build skills and move in a different direction.
Helen, I remember you telling me a little bit about skill scoring as a feature you introduced to the platform. Was that part of the kind of adapting to those guided pathways? Tell us a little bit about that and how that came to be.
Yeah, so some of that was already underway before the pandemic happened. In terms of, I think we've already started seeing a demand for wanting to understand how employees are performing or how people could perform on a job based off of the skills. Because if you think about a particular role, essentially it's just a collection of different skills and skill proficiencies of, as a product manager, you need to know communication skills, you need to know some agile planning skills, you need to be able to work with engineers, data scientists, those types of folks. And so a lot of taking our currently 3,000 plus course catalog is how do we tie those to skills and have that be almost a currency in which learners can use to talk to employers to say, maybe you might not know the specifics of what's taught in this particular course of Crash Course on Python, for example. But at the end of that, we can say, this learner is now at a beginner Python level. And that becomes a more universal way to talk about the stuff that learners are doing on our platform in a way that also employers understand.
Awesome. Now, I love all the ways you guys have talked about, kind of thinking outside the classroom. And that's what I really was thinking about when we're talking about the education ecosystem. I mean, we have Coursera, which is this platform houses content, right? It's valuable for students. It's valuable as a distribution for professors. But we've realized, you've realized all these different ways that, education is not optional and it's a lifelong process. Tell us more about how you started brainstorming how to apply Coursera in all these different places. How did that conversation happen internally?
So maybe I'll talk about in the spring, I mentioned earlier that we decided to offer up Coursera for Campus to thousands of universities around the world. And this was a huge undertaking for us. We shipped it out in about a month's time frame, which was a very aggressive time frame for us. And we went from having, hundreds of customers that we were onboarding in a very hands-on one-to-one way to thousands of customers around the world. And so we had to get really creative around how we automated the processes that were usually pretty manual for us. And so this is where Pendo came into a lot of help for us as we were auto-provisioning and spinning up thousands of orgs. We relied heavily on Pendo for the onboarding training that we were making available to universities as we were getting them started. And that was a tremendous help for us. We both, showed them how to use the product using Pendo, and we also marketed our online webinars for them to come in and hear us talk about how to use the product more effectively. So a lot of it, I guess to summarize, a lot of the effort we had to spend had to do with just scale, going from a small number of customers to a very, very large number of customers within the space of a month or two.
I mean, I see a really similar narrative. We have teachers who are used to being in a classroom, delivering content in person. Now that has to go online. And then you have institutions who are usually used to being onboarded in a one-to-one way. And now we have to bring that online and bring that into a digital context. Any learnings from that onboarding process, finding ways to scale up that human interaction? What worked? What should our audience know?
So we had to iterate and experiment a little bit. Language barriers existed. Communicating through email was a challenge, going into people's spam boxes quite a bit. And so a lot of our iteration had to do with just getting them into the product so that we could then use tools like Pendo to consistently communicate with them. And so, yeah, a lot of our iteration was driven around just kind of getting over those hurdles.
I think in traditional PM sense from the learner side, some of what we did was try to more understand, like part of the way that we came up with the learning paths concept was trying to understand of all of the career resources out there that we could potentially provide on Coursera, what are learners actually turning to Coursera for? Is it salary information? Is it new job postings? And what really came about there was, to your point, Kevin, the idea of more of a guided learning path. And so we used more like user research interviews and a lot of one-on-one conversations with folks to understand what were the specific pain points. And then once we saw that pattern, that became what we built in to be able to scale across all learners and see that this is something that's not unique to these 4 folks that we interviewed, but really could be applied to millions of folks across the platform.
Great. Any other kind of blocking and tackling product management things you guys have been working on lately?
I think, like all product managers, some of the hardest part of our job is prioritizing so many different things that we could do. And Coursera is lucky to be in a place where there is a lot of value that we can add in this space. And we're thinking about, on all different fronts, learners, institutions, educators, what can we do to support people? And so, that did disrupt our roadmaps in the middle of the quarter and things like that I expect many PMs can relate to. So those conversations are definitely ongoing. We're just checking in on a regular basis, like, what else is there that's happening in the world that we need to react to? And overall, I wouldn't say that it's taken us in a totally different direction from where we were going. If anything, it just accelerated a lot of the trends that we were already seeing. And so it feels natural in a lot of ways, at least from my perspective. And the question is just like, how fast can we move?
Yeah, and that takes us to a really great question from one of our audience members. I do want to remind our studio audience that we are taking your questions. Would love to hear what you would love to ask the Coursera team. But you mentioned accelerating trends that were already happening. Like, what do you think some of those key trends are? What's going to change in the education ecosystem as we have this digitization? And what are some of the things that can't change or won't change? What's going to stay the same?
Well, I think it's clear, and we talked about this a little bit before, but learners really like the convenience of online learning, and they like the choice that they have on a platform like Coursera, being able to consume content from many different experts out in the field, and being able to pick and choose the information and the instructor that they find that resonates with them. And so for universities to keep up with that, they're really going to need to engage with their learners in a meaningful way, right? So we talked about that flipped classroom model. It's only going to work if the university does it. And so they need to rethink how they are engaging with students and how they build that relationship between faculty and students, so that they are so that students continue to see them as an essential part of their learning process.
I think if I go back to the skills point as well, like every year at Coursera, we do a 3-year vision update of thinking about where will the company be in 3 years from now. And to Jenny's point, a lot of the trends we were predicting of blended learning will probably need to be a bigger piece of how we think about teaching, or learners are going to care more about the outcomes that they're getting from different learning experiences. Those were part of our 3-year vision, and we're just seeing them play out sooner now. I think for, at least from the learner side, with what we've seen right now, there's still 2 main populations of learners. There are the folks who are just coming to Coursera for the enrichment or for we call them the passionate learners, the folks who just want to learn for the sake of learning. And I think, as I mentioned earlier, the area that we're seeing a bigger need for now is also how do you tie the learning to some type of job outcome or some type of skill profile that you can end up showing to employers.
Well, that's a really wonderful point. I mean, I saw recently that some of the large tech companies are announcing these like 6-month certification programs rather than a 4-year degree. So like we're having this acceleration of learning and being very job outcome oriented. Um, has that broached your conversations internally? How are you guys thinking about that trend?
Yeah, I think one of the products I think we're most proud of within Coursera is the idea of our Google IT certificate, where it is really thinking about how do you take someone who has no technical background and train them to be ready for a new IT job by the end of, I think ours is also around 4 or 6 months. And really just like what are the most job relevant skills and how do we teach them in a way that is approachable for anyone, even if they don't have a bachelor's degree background, or oftentimes they don't need the bachelor's degree to begin with. So how can we just focus on the specific skills? The other area we've seen a lot of demand for is more hands-on learning. Since there are so many tools that are coming about, there's both the concept of knowledge, which might stay more static, like the basic concepts of math or the basic concepts of computer science, but there's also a lot of tools that are evolving. So how do we keep on top of new technology trends that are coming up and make sure that we have content that helps learners learn those tools? The area that we've started investing in to support that has really been around our guided projects. So thinking about as new tools come up, how do we get experts to basically train learners on how that tool works? And the guided project experience is very much a side-by-side learning experience where you see the instructor's screen on one half of your computer and you see your own screen on the other half of the computer, and you can essentially walk through the tool with the instructor's voiceover as a way to stay on top of new tools coming up.
That's a great call out, Helen. We are excited about guided projects because there's both an opportunity to kind of create these guided projects for macro training, like how do you program in Python, but it also allows enterprises and campuses to kind of provide specialized training easily. It's one thing to think about how data science works in general, but to really understand how data science is being applied within your company, and being able to train your staff to understand the principles they need in order to perform their job well within their company is kind of a leapfrog innovation that we're benefiting from with guided projects.
I want to pivot a little bit. We're getting some great questions in the chat about learner engagement. So we have a question from Rizul about, everything's online now. We've talked about Zoom fatigue a lot. I really hate staring at my computer after, about 5:30 p.m. What strategies are you guys thinking about to keep both teachers and students engaged in a, screen-heavy environment?
Thankfully, that's something that Coursera has a lot of experience in. I would say it is not meant to be something that you sit down in front of for hours at a time with no breaks, right? That is not your ideal online learning experience for most people. We have a lot of ways to keep students engaged. One thing is when you're watching lecture videos on Coursera, we encourage the instructors to create in-video questions as just formative, lightweight assessments in the middle of it. So you'll be watching a video and then partway through it'll pop up with a like, and which of these answers do you think is correct? Or just giving you a chance to practice and start applying what you just learned. So even watching a video does not have to be a passive experience. And then there are other ways that we can keep people engaged in group projects, in the discussion forums, in peer reviews. There's more interaction than you would think is really possible in an online environment. And I think a lot of people are realizing that now as they're moving online. I studied humanities in university, and I think a lot of my professors would be reluctant to move online. But if you had a 15-person discussion section about a novel, you can do that on Zoom. Right? We can have exactly the same kind of discussion here where no one's lecturing at anyone and we're all, going through this journey together. So I think it really just depends on the type of learning experience that you want to create, but there are a lot of parallels for making it engaging in an online environment.
We also,
Oh, Helen, we lost your audio. Go ahead, Terry.
We're going to try to tech check the AirPods real quick. Terry, you were saying?
Yeah, we also bake into the learning experience different techniques for keeping engagement up. We give learners nudges if they're starting to fall behind. We give them gentle reminders to keep up with their work, and the work is paced out across the time, a particular like best practice time frame, just to keep them moving forward at a regular pace. And we have dashboards for the instructors to help identify which students are falling behind and who's at risk, so that they can reach out and help those learners get back engaged.
Well, and student engagement is something else that our audience has asked a number of questions about. Reminder to the studio audience, would love to take some more of your questions. But one of our attendees asked, for students that are dropping off or falling behind, what strategies can you put in place from a product design perspective and also from a learning design perspective to keep students motivated, keep them engaged to come back? Is it on the teacher? Is it a Coursera function? What do you balance?
So we think, am I back now?
Yeah.
Great. So we think a lot about how we scale teaching and learning support. Obviously, in a classroom environment, you have the teacher actually monitoring which students were perhaps falling behind or struggling or aren't paying as much attention, versus on the online environment, you can't have one instructor monitoring thousands of students. And so that's where we lean a lot on our data and trying to understand, are learners behaving or engaging with us at the rate that we would expect? And if not, are there ways that we can essentially nudge them back onto the platform with little reminders like, hey, you set a goal initially at the beginning of this week that you wanted to study twice this week, and so far you're maybe falling behind. So don't forget to log back in, and maybe even use our calendar sync feature to actually set aside some time on your Google Calendar to say, this is my Coursera study time. There are other ways where even just like basic email notifications or mobile notifications is a way of saying like, hey, like, don't forget your week 1 assignment is due on Sunday, and just having that little reminder coming up of, there was a timeline that you initially committed to when you joined this class, and yes, maybe you can be intentional about shifting that, but if not, we're going to give you the reminders to keep you engaged in almost like micro moments based off of the next assessment or the next video. And then on platform itself, we also are able to use data as a way to keep learners engaged by saying, for example, we have our little pop-up tool that says, we call it Atlas, and she'll essentially come up and say like, don't forget to get started on the first video. Like, it's shown that 82% of learners are more likely to finish this course if they watch this first video within the 5 minutes of logging on. So kind of using the data that we've seen from how learners usually engage with our platform as a way to then nudge even more positive learner behavior for future learners.
And in the future, we're also looking to add more social proof into the experience, so that learners can see how their peers are doing and what their peers are excited about, and kind of build that momentum across the learner base.
Yeah, it sounds like there's a lot of built-ins and future features planned for the Coursera platform as a whole. But I think if we put our product manager hat back on, I think that runs into what I think is a very common problem, where we have a robust platform where users, whether they're students or teachers, are familiar with a narrow part of it and may not naturally explore other parts of it. How do you guys approach that kind of product-wide adoption, finding other ways to get value out of the platform?
Well, I know that on the enterprise side, we use Pendo heavily for that. We regularly put out Pendo guides as administrators log in to help expose new features to them and walk them through a tutorial of how to take advantage of a new feature that they think will provide them value. We also regularly put surveys up in front of our users to get their input on features that we're building and beta testing, so that we can iterate and refine those experiences and maximize usefulness for those administrators so that they want to use those features.
You know, I'm curious because, and sorry, Jenny, but how do you decide what features to drive people to? I find that, you know, yeah, you can put a guide up and, you know, people will see it, but how do you decide what features are actually going to, you know, make someone a stickier user or actually, you know, get your you know, more value like that?
We talk to customers a lot, and we hear from them where they're feeling pain and what they're struggling with. And a lot of the features that we would put in front of them to get their feedback on are ones that directly solve for the kinds of pain that they're articulating to us. So there's a real kind of symbiotic relationship between us and the customers to help identify and iterate on those features. But we also gather a lot of data from Pendo to see click paths in the journey to understand what people are using, what they're not using, and to understand the trends and outcomes that are related to their behaviors.
We're doing very similar things on the educator side as well. So, you know, ideally we've been talking to partners a lot and we're hearing what their pain points are for, you know, it takes too long to create a quiz. So, you know, we built some feature to automatically import a Google document if you authored your quiz there instead, and then save you all the time for copy pasting. And that's the type of thing where we want to make sure people know it's available. Otherwise, you know, why did we build it if no one's going to use it? So, and we know that it's going to make their lives easier. So that's the type of thing that we would use a Pendo notification for. That's like, hey, we've got something new and here's how to use it. It's quick and easy, and, you know, link to our documentation for more details if you need it. And then be able to track the adoption of how many people are actually using it, and hopefully seeing an impact of that on our overall partner satisfaction.
We also have product researchers who are really focused on, you know, building deep empathy with our customer base and understanding what their needs are. And our product researchers use Pendo heavily within the product to connect with customers and get that feedback.
And then from a learner side, we probably do a lot more around A/B testing. So oftentimes we don't actually know which feature we're supposed to be pointing them to. At the end of the day, we're trying to drive LTV and learner retention and the ability to find the right course. And so oftentimes what we've done is basically set up more modularized dashboard, for example, where we can show different courses to different users and see based off of how users are actually engaging with which course we're showing them, which ones should we rank more heavily versus others. Or for specific features, for example, we'll sometimes put it in a more prominent place so that we see if we put all the attention, or if we focus all the users' attention on this particular area, how does that change behavior? And based off of that, monitor which users are actually finding the most value from this feature, and then maybe being more smart about surfacing this feature only to the learners that will find it most valuable.
We've got a great question from Eric that I think is relevant to this idea of, you know, when do you introduce different features or how do you use guides? Eric would love to hear examples of how you track and manage those user interventions or guides and align them to the customer journey. How do you know when and how to shape, you know, someone onboarding or growing within your platform?
So with when we rolled out the Coursera for Campus COVID response initiative, you know, there was a particular day where we turned it live. We had our Pendo guide lined up and ready, and as we started provisioning customers, we were just keeping an eye on the usage data within Pendo. Right, there are good reports and dashboards to keep track of how often the guide is being used, and we were looking to make sure that that go after they log in and go through the tutorial, what was their next action? Were they doing the right next steps? And so from our perspective, the right next step was to invite a bunch of learners into the program and let them start learning. And so in the first few rounds, we noticed that learners were, or the administrators were logging in, they were going through the Pendo guide, and some of them were successfully inviting students to the program, but many of them weren't. They seemed to be stagnant and stuck. And so then we incorporated invitations to the webinars through Pendo out to administrators, and we got a bunch of them attending. And what we found out was that they just weren't sure how to drive forward within their university, like how to get university adoption started. And so, you know, through those couple of stages with Pendo, we were really able to get to the point where we understood, oh, they need some best practices, they need encouragement, they need to be shown the right path forward in terms of just kind of driving adoption within their learner base. And so it was very helpful to be able to use the tooling to just uncover these needs as we went along and adapt.
Absolutely. Other examples, Jenny or Helen, that you'd like to share?
For us, I guess the original question was about how do you map the guides to the customer journey. And for us, the journey, it really depends for each course that you're creating. You could be in like 5 different stages of your journey all at once. So what I really love about the guides is that you can just decide the right page to put them on, so that whenever someone encounters it, it's hopefully the right place and time for them, because you've only said the people who are on this page doing this stage are going to be seeing it. So for us, that's things like if we have some tips and tricks about how to upload assets in bulk, if you are going to the asset library, then that's probably the right place and time to show you that information, not when you're authoring an assessment somewhere else. So just being very targeted in the audience and the placement of the guides, I think is helpful.
I also learned recently from Pendo about some new functionality in the guides of being able to move the user from one page to another, like that the guide can help them navigate across pages. And so I'm really excited to be able to put that into play as we build out our guides.
Oh, nice. What are you hoping to do with that?
You know, we have within administration on the enterprise side, there are multiple steps to setting up a new organization, right? You come in, you pick the content that you want to make available to your learners, you invite learners to consume that content, then you monitor who's joining, who's not, you send reminders. So there's a process that the administrator has to go through. And so to be able to demonstrate best practice of that process to the administrator using the guide is super helpful.
Awesome. Well, I always like to end with metrics, and I always think that, you know, if we can't measure it, it might not even matter. What metrics are you guys looking at? What do you think the most important metrics that are on your dashboards today, whether they're Pendo data or business data? What's important, and what are you guys being held responsible for?
I can start. So like I mentioned, our overall metric is LTV, so lifetime value, and that could be across a lot of our different products in terms of a learner might come in with a free MOOC and kind of just explore that and maybe just audit the course, but then eventually want to convert them into a paid learner and then see maybe they'll be eligible for a degree longer term. LTV is also a very long ranging metric, and so oftentimes we find more leading metrics that will then can be correlated to some LTV value. And so if we think about, for example, within our current learner funnel, we often have the traditional top of funnel metrics around people actually coming to the site, people then registering for the site, and then people enrolling in their first course. And then post enrolling in the first course, it's a lot around module completion and item completion, trying to get them through that course itself. And then afterwards, it's then back to enrollment of like, let's get them to enroll in the next course. And so depending on the PM, there's different parts of the funnel that each person's focusing on. Some folks are focused specifically on the registration, some are focused specifically on the conversion to enrollment, and others are focused more on the in-course experience. And then we're overall tying back to LTV.
Yeah, and I think on the enterprise side, in addition to that, we're going to keep our renewals for our enterprise customers if we're providing value from their perspective. And a key driver of value, either for a business or a campus, is whether learners are consuming content and whether they're building skills. And so a lot of the metrics we have on the enterprise side are to understand how enrollments are going, whether students are completing courses, so that's just the pragmatic act of, are people taking enough content? Are they consuming content? And then as we roll out more of that skills-based tracking that Helen has talked about, we really want to demonstrate value to our enterprise customers, that we are directly impacting the skills that the learners are building, and that those learners are kind of building their jobs, building their careers, and finding those opportunities to get promotions and find new jobs if they're students, find a job, a great job if they're unemployed, right? So really that's what matters to the enterprises. Like, are the learners in the right job that they want to be in, and are they building the skills to get there?
On the authoring side, it's pretty similar as well. I guess we have longer term goals of launching a lot of more courses, because there are learners that have gaps in our catalog that we need to fill so that they can learn the right things. So we want to make sure that we're launching a lot of new content and bringing it to launch as quickly as possible. So there's an element of how efficient is it to author, and then the piece of, we still want it to be high quality. So, learners rate and review our courses, and we want to make sure that they are finding value from it. We're not just like speeding to launch something and then people don't like it. So for the authoring tools, that comes into play, like, how can we make things as self-serve as possible, and also hits on the topic of scale that we discussed earlier, that if there are manual operations that are involved in launching a course, we want to make that as smooth as possible and empower our authors to do as much as they can on their own, and that helps everyone be more efficient.
All right, I think we got to leave it there. Thank you so much for the Coursera team, for our live studio audience, for everyone who watches later on demand. We're so glad that you took the time to talk about this really important subject. Education is no longer optional. It's never been optional, and Coursera is leading the way in how we deliver content and great education in this new digital world. So thanks to everyone, and stay safe, stay sane.